My name is Karen Tucker. I'm CEO at the Churchill Club, and it's wonderful to see so many friends as well as new faces here tonight. So we really appreciate you coming out and being with us. The title of our program is Trends in Journalism When Critics Become Capitalists. Journalists perform an important role as critics and watchdogs of some of the world's most powerful people and companies. What happens to service, though, in the public interest when journalists accept the role of working to help people make money or making it themselves? We have an amazing set of speakers here to opine on this topic. We have Tom Foremski of Silicon Valley Watcher, Cory Johnson of Bloomberg TV, Sarah Lacy of PandoDaily, Josh Quittner of Flipboard, and of course our moderator, Alan Deutschman of Nevada, Reno. Welcome to our speakers, and thank you very much for being with us also. A special thanks to Alan Deutschman for all of his help in putting this program together and for hosting us in this wonderful facility. We thank Autodesk. We truly appreciate Autodesk's hospitality and generosity. Let's thank them now. A few words about this organization, the Churchill Club. Our mission as a nonprofit is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And for 29 years, we've been convening audiences up to 40 times a year and inviting insightful speakers to share their views about timely tech-related business and technology topics, just as we'll be doing this evening. Anything technology touches where big changes ahead are fair game for a Churchill program. We aim to illuminate the implications of today's trends in terms of what they really mean for tomorrow. And we respectfully ask our speakers not to pitch, but rather to contribute new thinking and ideas to the conversation and to attempt to advance collective understanding, hopefully inspiring others to positive action. We are a community benefit organization, and we truly enjoy working very closely with the community that we serve. So we just want to encourage you to participate and be in touch with us with your ideas and suggestions. We're always open to that. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and there are other Twitter codes in your printed programs. Our next program is next week on January 28th as we look at data privacy trends for the year ahead. This is at the W, San Francisco. And then on February 5th, breakfast in Santa Clara about where work and the workplace are headed. And we're back up here on February 26th in San Francisco with a meaty discussion about global growth and productivity to be held at Wharton, San Francisco. So I hope you'll plan to join us for all or some of those programs. Let's now go to Alan to dive into the content of our program. Alan.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank all of you for coming here today. Our topic, as Karen mentioned, is Trends in Journalism When Critics Become Capitalists. I'm going to try to introduce the topic and the panelists together and talk for just a few minutes because with 5 journalists on stage, this might be my only chance to talk before each other. What we all have in common, the 5 of us here today, is that we started out and came of age as journalists, business journalists, in the 1980s and the 1990s, working for major media organizations at a time when, as business journalists, we were insulated from the realities of the businesses itself that we worked for. I know Cory started at Time Incorporated. I started at Time Incorporated at Fortune. Josh, early in his career, was at Time. Tom was at the Financial Times. Sarah at Business Week. We were working for media organizations that had been around for decades, that were wealthy, powerful, entrenched, where the journalists could go and do their work because of the cultures that insulated them from what was happening in the businesses themselves. The businesses were very profitable. It was a very stable environment. And you knew that you could do your role as critic, as watchdog, as skeptic. You could be Diogenes to the Alexander the Greats of the day with impunity almost. I would be able to write critically about people like Steve Jobs or Mark Andreessen, and there were no repercussions. In fact, it was valued to have that critical edge. When I was at a conference once and Bill Gates saw me and walked across the room and began a 3-hour argument or perhaps tirade to me about what we had written about him in Fortune, I knew that I was doing my job, and that was valued. Publications.
Try that with Elon Musk. Or, try working for a publication where you rip Elon Musk.
The world has changed.
You can't. It's Teflon.
He's a genius.
Yep.
No one's Teflon.
Here at the University of Nevada, Reno, down the road from the new Giga factory, we think he's a genius. He's certainly for Reno. But yes, the world has changed. And since then, those companies have been disrupted. The great media giants have either crumbled or collapsed. Ownership has changed without necessarily a transmission of the same culture and values and appreciation of the public interest. The media has become 24/7, constant. Technology now lets us monitor our contributions to the bottom line in minute ways that can be measured precisely. And one of the most interesting trends is that many business journalists have left those once powerful organizations and become media entrepreneurs themselves. And here represented on this panel, we have Tom, who left the Financial Times over a decade ago and was, I believe, the first person.
I'm not sure this is the smartest thing I did.
You're still here, but Tom went into business for himself as a blogger in 2004. Cory left to go work on Wall Street, taking his investigative reporting skills, honed as a journalist, and to put them to work making money for hedge funds, then coming back to journalism.
Are you still hedging?
No, but I feel the weight of those investments back in the day.
Sarah, of course, after writing 2 books as the founder of Pando. Josh, after doing entrepreneurial ventures for Time Inc., is now editorial director and in charge of partnerships for Flipboard, digital media company. I'm the only one without the kind of gumption and drive. I've become a professor.
Why are you in Reno?
Well, because the University of Nevada is a innovative, forward-looking school, although more so the colleague who sits next to me who at the university, who is our new professor of media entrepreneurship, which is what we're teaching students even at the earliest time in their career. So what I'd like us to talk about is there a conflict between, what are the tensions between still trying to be critics while many of us have also become capitalists, have either become media entrepreneurs or working for organizations that are facing a new and more brutal reality about competing in the marketplace. Sarah, I know your motto is speaking truth to the new power. How do you deal with those tensions, and what are the tensions of trying to write critically about the companies and people who are, or maybe investors, business partners, speakers at your conferences, audience members?
Right. Well, it definitely is a conflict. And I think it's one of many conflicts you have in journalism. And I think there's always been conflicts in journalism. I mean, when you're a beat reporter.
But there's sizes of conflicts too, right?
Right. Yeah. But I think it's ultimately all about mitigating those conflicts. If you're a beat reporter back in the Business Week days and you have one shot of getting a cover and Apple is on your beat, you've got to be really respectful and play by Apple's rules in order to get any interview where you could get that cover. And that's your future job security. That's whether you might be getting a raise or a bonus. I mean, every reporter is in this uncomfortable tension if they're at all relying on access from sources where they are in one way or another getting advancement and enrichment based on that sort of dicey relationship. So I think
that's why Daily Show can tell the truth, because it doesn't rely on access. Doesn't matter if it doesn't get invited to the next Washington press conference.
No, I mean, I think you see it even more extreme in Washington than you do in the business press. And so I think then when you've lived that as a journalist and you become an entrepreneur, you're sort of used to that uncomfortableness. And I think it helps to have had a track record of calling people out. I think people know what they're getting into. But, you know, when we set out to build Pando, I was supposed to take over as the editor-in-chief of TechCrunch. And after AOL had bought it, sort of ugly stuff went down while I was in labor, having a baby. I came back home from the hospital, and there had essentially been a coup. There had been all these problems, and it was just so horrible.
And you had a baby.
I didn't feel like I could go back there. I know, and I had a baby and a conference in China in 6 weeks. And I didn't feel like I could go back there, and I didn't feel like I could go back there for any amount of money. I just felt it was sort of toxic and poisoned, and so I decided to start my own company. But you know, I've been a writer my whole career. You know, my husband was an artist. We didn't have money. I'm not independently wealthy, and in the past, media organizations and newspapers were started by families who were independently wealthy. So if you want to do real journalism and not just, you know, kids making $30,000 a year rewriting press releases, there's other people like me who have families who need to make money. So we had to raise money. I mean, it was that or we didn't start the company. And so, yes, it's a conflict, but it's a conflict you go into with your eyes open. You're very clear with your investors, the kind of reporting that you're going to do, and you always do that kind of reporting. You're very clear what it means. We have made sure that no investor has more than 8% of the company. No investor has a board seat. I completely control the board, and I own 60% of the company. So, you know, no one can ever force us into a position. And we've built the company on a shoestring, and it's taken us longer to do things because we raised just enough that we needed to pay salaries and start building this thing. And, you know, we'll be profitable this year, and then we'll be in control of our own destiny, and we'll not have to raise money again. And it's, you know, so you accept the conflict, but then you know that it's like, you're going to mitigate it as much as possible, be open with everyone, be open with your readers, and it's like, that's kind of.
And what's the worst that can happen? You favor a couple of startups that happen to have some kind of connection, but everybody's connected anyway, and it's not like Watergate. I
don't know. I take it pretty seriously. I take it pretty seriously. I think reader trust is really the only thing that we have in this business.
There is. Doing a profile on a startup because it's a startup, you know, we're starting to lose those kinds of stories because there's no page views in it, for example. So it's only the larger companies that will get guaranteed coverage. And what happens if PR companies say, well, come and talk to my client and we'll drive traffic to your story? You know, there's so many ways to corrupt the media these days.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, point being, there's a million different conflicts other than sort of the obvious conflicts that people like to talk about. And, you know, and it's just, I mean, there's certain conflicts that we absolutely draw the line on. I don't invest in companies, and none of our reporters invest in companies. That's an old media construct that I still think is really, really important, that frankly TechCrunch as an organization didn't agree with, which were one of my issues there. So I think it's about like looking at your own conscience and knowing what you feel good about. And the good and the bad of media startups, one reason they're so brutal and they take so long to build is it's the ultimate iterative startup. Every day you are starting over and re-putting your product out there. And the only thing you can do is every single day do that. And you know, we're 3 years old and we are known for picking huge battles with Uber, with Snapchat, with Beachmint, with a lot of very well-funded companies, and we share investors with all of them. They got sold for a fraction of their value 9 months after they ran out of capital, as we said.
Other than that, it was a great outcome.
But we, you know, yeah.
Wait a second. The issue isn't who you're picking battles with, it's who you're not picking battles with. Uber didn't invest in you, right?
No, we share investors, though. No, we didn't accept any money from any individual companies or entrepreneurs.
Well, I mean, the problem is, you know, we were talking to prepare about this, and what is journalism? We were sort of getting into that whole thing. And I was actually thinking a lot about that. And if we all sort of accept the basic idea that journalism is this hunt for truth, right? That's what journalists do. You look for the truth, and then if you're good, you package it up in an entertaining way, and you put it out there, and lots of people think it's interesting. But if fundamentally it's the search for truth, then there's a lot of noise in the environment right now, I think. I mean, because there are lots of
noise.
that small companies have.
Yeah, it's not even noise. It's worthless. It's worthless. I mean,
chasing page views is one problem that you mentioned. That's a terrible problem, and I think we're now starting to kind of come to grips with that.
Well, not really.
Like mommy bloggers getting paid to endorse things. And
yes, and the PR people, the marketing people are deliberately corrupting them. Mummy bloggers didn't know, oh, if we take this stuff and write about it, that's not good. That's not ethical. They didn't figure that out. They deliberately poison their own well for short-term gain. And that's also what I think is happening with native advertising, which I'll talk about later.
Josh, you want to talk about your career a little bit, like where you Sarah, you started in magazines, moved on to TechCrunch, you moved on to this wonderful thing that you're doing now. Talk about what you've done, because I think it's interesting.
You mean going to Flipboard?
No, like
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that you're on. Really? I have a loud voice.
he's so on though.
Convinced you were
on.
Well, I started on typewriters,
Yeah.
the
me
Albuquerque
too.
Journal.
Describe to everyone what those are.
You push these buttons and these big pieces of metal come flying out and hit a piece of paper.
There was ink. There was a.
But when you were talking, we were
Carbon
talking before
paper.
about the church and state wall. When I went from the Albuquerque Journal to Newsday in New York, and the church and state wall in the mid 1980s was so high that the ad side, the business side, was kept in a completely separate part of the building. And if an advertiser, somebody from that department actually walked through the newsroom, it was as if we were all defiled.
The
Yeah.
scandal.
And everyone would be
to go
quiet.
into the
and they would
clean
look.
room.
It was, it was like a man in the woman's dorm.
It was almost like there was
yes.
a union grievance.
Right.
I mean, that's how buffered.
No,
we
at
were.
Business Week, we were literally in different buildings in different cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they were in San Francisco.
And that's
we
why
were-
journalists have no idea what the economics of their own industry is.
And
And they're not
Yeah.
interested in it.
it's true.
I don't know if it's a bad thing. I mean,
It is a bad
freaking
thing.
old. It's
I
not
actually
bad.
think it was a
Follow
bad
the
thing
money.
because I think the journalism business was really late to understand what was happening and how to fix it. It was
Yeah.
as if we dispassionately were lying on our
Hula.
back and we said, oh, look, my toes are on fire.
Yeah.
And then you said, oh, no, it's
Oh,
spreading to my
pretty,
knees.
pretty colors.
And nobody actually went out to say, how are we going to stop this until it was too late.
So wait, so you went from Albuquerque to Newsday, paper to paper.
But I started writing about the internet, which was known as the information superhighway around 1992, 1993. I was the first person at Newsday to actually get that my beat was called Life in Cyberspace. Yeah, that's
And
kind
it
of,
was Long Island Newsday, but it was
Long
made
Island
a big
Newsday.
push into New York City at the time.
that's right. And so my stories would get picked up on the wire service there.
Taking over Alan's job.
Oh, please do.
For a living, I'm sorry.
And then I started writing for Wired while I was there, and I made my way to Time and was hired to write about the internet for years at Time.
That was under Walter?
Under Walter. Walter
Walter Isaacson wrote a book about
Steve
the
Jobs.
guy.
Yeah.
And sold better
Yeah.
than anything else.
I feel really privileged because I got to
Combined.
start on typewriters and end up in.
What are you using now? What are you typing on now? Are you typing anything?
I think I mostly just talk into things now. I don't think I even.
But all of us, I mean, we were, people who were covering the early days of the information superhighway, the commercialization of the internet, or even before then. We were kind of sheltered from the business reality of our organizations. I remember when I was 25 years old, I wrote a cover story for Fortune about 25-year-olds that had a guy who looked like Tom Cruise on the cover. And the powers that be told me it was the best-selling issue of the year on the newsstand, because instead of having someone who looks like a 70-year-old bald guy, we had Tom Cruise. But it didn't matter because
Who was the dude?
he was a salesman for Intel. Because 95% of our copies were subscription. There was lots of advertising. You could lose big advertisers, and it didn't matter. And it actually showed you were doing your job. And there was no need to know. To know about the business, but those of us who were as business journalists, we got to know a lot about business, and particularly here in Silicon Valley, a lot of us got infected by that kind of entrepreneurial startup culture, and there were examples of people, like Mike Moritz, who left Time to go to Sequoia and become one of the most famous venture capitalists of all times and such. So, we were kind of part of this entrepreneurial community, and I often felt that we were kind of like the monks at the orgy a little bit. And I wanted to start a magazine in my 20s, and I got together with colleagues at Time Inc. and on Wall Street, and
Everybody
we didn't
did.
have
It was
$1 billion
easy.
in 10 years
No,
to do
but
it.
look, I started the magazine in my mid-20s in the height because newsprint was cheap. I figured that out in London. I was editing a small microelectronics paper, and so I was living in the Haight-Ashbury, and I'm jogging one day, and I'm thinking, my God, there's no local newspaper. This is a global media brand, and there's nothing here. So I started a local newspaper. And, you know, wonderful thing was my American friends all said, oh, what can I do? I can write poetry, I can do photography. Everybody wanted to get involved. My English friends, when they saw the paper, they go, oh, why are you doing this? What's the point? And so on. It was, this is the best story about the cultural divide between America and England.
I think it's intriguing what Sarah's doing at Pando, because Sarah, you know, comes into this with a Sarah Lacy head of steam, which is how Sarah Lacy walks into everything, but also with some you know, a level of credibility that's very high. With people, you know, have people in this ridiculous little community of Silicon Valley have opinions about Sarah's work, which is sort of hilarious as a journalist, because really all you do is write your fucking stories and then people react to it. But suddenly it's about you, the writer, not about the piece.
But it's Sarah and Paul these days, right? It's
But it's interesting that there's such a huge enterprise happening in Silicon Valley right now, that there's great interest in what's happening, and a great lack of, therefore, a great lack of knowledge in what's happening. And so just rewriting press releases has created a handful of publications that rewrite press releases, and then they try to sometimes try to add snarkiness and you know, and
terrible.
and you see it in you know, these publications do sometimes great things. TechCrunch, Mashable, whatever.
And it's not really the reporter's fault. Their job is to get up and write 10 things a day.
Yes.
And
10
there
things
is
a
no way to do that other than rewriting press releases. It's the
Exactly.
organizations
It's
that
not
have
their-
created it.
Well, have we taken some of the best journalistic talent of our generation who used to work for publications that had tremendous impact and respect and track records, who had a chance to do big stories, you know, have we kind of sent them all on this this kind of constant around the clock, you know, search for the next incremental half-life of 3 seconds kind of story? Have we you know, kind of pushed them from doing kind of real potentially public interest journalism to essentially being the, you know, second by second trade publication
Well, it's
for the industry?
cataloging. I mean,
But I don't
on some
think
level,
so.
all those stories are all those stories. I feel like on some level are cataloging. Like I find, like TechCrunch has this thing called Crunchbase that tells you how much some company put into some VC firm put into some company, and I suspect that about 20% of it's completely inaccurate.
No,
Maybe it's all accurate.
no, I think it's quite highly
No,
accurate.
Maybe highly accurate.
It's
I don't know.
not that
But
accurate.
But it,
No?
Like, I know the interns who used to enter it when Mike would
Well, what's the
yell.
point?
Yeah.
No, my point is that it's cataloging, and the stories are cataloging, and they're not journalism. They're not interpretive. Maybe they shouldn't be, but the role of a journalist is sort of degraded to like rewriting.
we can't
a press
afford
release, putting
them.
a spin,
That's
entering the
Well,
data
but-
into a thing.
But I don't think it is. I mean, look, we have one reporter on staff, and we are a tiny startup, like, who is like still struggling to get profitable, and like, should something go cataclysmically wrong, we don't have that much money in the bank. So we are by no means in a position of mega strength here. But one of our, you know, very few full-time staffers is Mark Ames, who will disappear for 5 months doing an investigative story and come back and did some of the deepest and most intense reporting on the wage collusion suit, to the point where a new suit was filed in Hollywood between Animation Works, and in the brief, they cited Pando's reporting. Those workers had no idea how abused they were. I mean, that was a massive impact that we had, where we're
That was a
paying huge
fantastic story,
salary
Sarah.
for a guy for 5
That was-
months to do it.
I don't know how you managed to do that, because 5 months is a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And you don't know what you're going to get. However, that story is a great story, and I'm shocked it's not a massive story, because all these companies are constantly talking about their wonderful people. Their capital is their engineers, yet they were colluding
Well, and it's
behind their
horrifying when you
backs
talk about
to keep their
Apple and
salary
Google were
down.
driving it, two companies that Wall Street is literally saying, we don't know what you can do with all this cash. I mean, two companies
Right,
that
right.
had
These are
that
the
don't know
richest
what to do
companies.
with
It's
their
not like they
cash
were short
were
of money.
colluding to keep. Like it, you know, it's an
Jobs was a
amazing
bully.
story.
Steve
But
Jobs was
point
a
being, look,
bully.
I think it is the credibility, and I think it is the ethics of the organization. For us as a media organization, we are happy to go out of business doing those stories. We are happy to be driven out of business by calling out a company like Uber. Like, I'm running the company. There are less respectable ways I could drive us out of business. I'm happy for
don't want to
those
go
be
out
the
of
ways
business, though,
we go
right?
out of business. No,
Everyone
but
be happy.
don't you? I mean, don't you think there's this journalistic thing of go out in a blaze of glory, calling someone out, and them trying to sue you out of existence and thwart the First Amendment versus I just couldn't sell enough sponsorships? I mean.
I don't think anyone's going to.
I mean, that story fell in your lap.
No one's gone on a blaze of glory since Thelma and Louise. I think. It didn't work out. You and Paul are going to go out that way, but not really. Josh, you were about to say something. What were you about to say?
No, I wasn't. I was ready to leap up and applaud.
But okay, so Sarah, so Tom, so day to day though, I mean, what happens when you're in a situation where you want someone to to speak at your event, and and then are they off limits? When you want to
Events.
write about a company that where they're not investors but their best friends are your investors.
Well, I get this in TV.
know,
too.
I
have to
propose
suck
a
up to- I have to
solution.
suck
No one's
up to
off
people on
limits.
TV, like in television, like I do this TV show called Bloomberg West. It's on. I do 2 hours a day, every day. I do 500 hours a year, and I do 6 or 7
Who's on
segments
it?
every day.
Who'd you interview?
So every day I've got to come up with at least
Really?
7 or 8 people or
should
14
call me up
people to come on
occasionally.
TV. I know he looks.
Yeah, Tom and I will do it anytime.
Exactly.
You guys get
We just ran the
amazing
corner,
guests.
too.
So I think we get great guests, and I'm really happy that people come on the show. But if they come on the show with me, they know that I'm going to say, like my friend Aaron Levy, who runs Box, I said, hey, your financials are crummy.
Mm-hmm.
You're spending $1.70 in marketing for every dollar you bring in revenues. Like, that's terrible. And he's like, Cory, come on, give me a break. But he and our friends, and he and our good. So he'll come on the show to do that. But it's the same. The dance that you have to do with conferences.
I
do
think
a
the
TV
bulk
show.
of people
I
get it's a
propose-
business. I think the bulk of people understand what we do for a living, and
I
as
have a
long as
solution.
you're fair and you're not blindsiding them, the bulk of them are adults. They're big boys and girls, and they get it.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is there's a handful of just whiny babies, and you know what? If,
But here's the other problem.
Travis Kalanick
just-
will
there
never
are
ever
other-
do
there-
a Pando
there are-
event. He's the head
Change
of the
their
most
diapers.
privately
Wait,
valued
move
company in the Valley. So does that hurt us on some level? Yeah, but again.
There's
happy
a
to go out of
simple
business that way.
solution.
No
There's a
one's off
simple
limits.
solution to this, right? And I proposed this like 8-9 years ago. Color-coded text. So I'm writing a story, right? If you see green text, it means I have a money relationship with that person. If you see a brown text, it means it's one of my friends or I'm brown-nosing somebody.
I like that.
If you see red text, comes from the company. This is not from me. The source is the company, and there you go. In very
And
simple
after they have
color-coded
punctuation marks in black and white.
Exactly.
I feel
Isn't
like
that a simple solution?
I love it. I feel like there's the problem with that is with your idea that like, hey, they know we're tough, but they know we're real, and that's the approach I try to take. Is like, if you want to come on my show and you want to come talk to me, like, and I hope that our viewers will know that I will ask that I will, it's not easy to sit across a round table from someone and say, hey, you're totally full of shit. Right? I mean,
I find that easy.
Is that what you said?
I don't know what this says about me.
no, we're both.
I'll rewatch interviews and be like, wow, I was so
We are
much
both
ruder than I thought
assholes.
I
You're a bigger
was.
asshole than I. But no, there's this thing that it's actually
So are people scared to come on?
so as you have the conversation, there's another show that will do less.
Yeah.
Right? There's
Well, your
Larry
job
King's
is
out
harder
there. There's
'cause
someone else
it's
who does
very
something
zero
else.
sum.
Is he still out there?
There's something else. There's someone else.
Charlie
there's someone
Rose
else.
is always out there.
There's,
He
there's
never
another
takes a
network.
day off.
There's another, hey, Fox Business didn't ask me so many tough questions.
What's your specialty, Cory?
Well, it's those issues.
Hard
So
issues.
Tom broke a story. 10
yeah,
years
about
ago
Cory.
About me quitting journalism.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about you turning evil. 'Cause sometimes when people say someone went to the dark side, they mean PR. You became a hedge fund guy.
So
what's it
in
like being a hedge fund guy?
2004, I ran into a party. I said, "Hey, I'm quitting CNBC. I was CNBC's first Silicon Valley correspondent,
And it's tallest.
and
Still the tallest.
the reigning tallest, but and reigning first. I guess that's how first works. But, I went to I left CNBC and I went to work for a hedge fund as an analyst. I went to another fund as a portfolio manager, and
Is it as glamorous as it sounds?
oh yes, does it sound glamorous?
Is it like Wolf of Wall Street?
It's just like that.
How can I join?
There are more strippers, more hookers, and more blow. But other than that, it's not glamorous. So I went to work for a hedge fund, and I found a specialty. Why would they hire me?
Yeah, why?
What I wondered at the time.
What the heck?
Right? And so what I found was that, and I walk in this room, it's a little room, like half the size of the room that we're sitting in right now, with about 6 or 7 people, and they're running $1 billion in equity capital with no leverage. And I look across the room. There's a Harvard MBA. He's the other guy that just got hired.
These are the guys that are giving you money.
There's a trader who knows how stocks work. There are 3 guys who have been analysts for the last 5 years. And my last job at CNBC was putting on makeup. My work as a journalist was walking up and talking to strangers.
You don't want to tell them that. Right?
And so what I decided to do was, and there was it was sort of a meta story of India, and there are people who will do what people do in the U.S. for a third the cost. So if it's entering numbers in spreadsheets, if it's getting an MBA and crunching numbers, if it's figuring out. So what I decided is, like, what do I do as a journalist? What are the unique skills that a journalist has? And I think principle one is skepticism. Like, I do not believe what that person in power just said.
Well, and fearless skepticism. Like, I think the fearlessness is so
Elting
important,
Thomas.
because when
That's
you're in
my
business
name.
and you're costing someone millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars in valuation based on you exposing something, it is not just skepticism.
great
it's
story.
the fearlessness.
But I
of being
never,
able to put yourself out there with that. Because
If it's
wasn't wearing
the
a
truth,
cape.
there's nothing to be afraid of.
I wear a cape around the house.
I have around the house. It was just like, I listened to someone say something, it's like, that sounds kind of like bullshit.
So have any of your
anyway.
stories moved markets?
So when
Absolutely, it's
so here's the thing that I found, and here's the thing that I had a really hard time with. Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. It wasn't a business story necessarily. Of course, a great business angle. There's always a technology angle. There's always a sports angle. There's always an angle. But I was working for a hedge fund, trying to make money for some really rich guys and make them richer. And if I found out that a stock was undervalued, the last thing I wanted was for anyone else to know. If I found out, and this became my specialty, was that a stock was overvalued, that there was a fraud, that the company lied, that they cheated, that they were stealing, the last thing I wanted was for that to become sort of sifted through the market as everyone knows they're liars, everyone knows they're cheats, everyone knows they're crooks.
you were an
No one believes.
anti-journalist.
I became an anti-journalist. I became
Mark
a person that wanted to
Cuban
get
model, isn't it?
information and keep it to myself.
Mark Cuban
And so
was
I
trying
watched
that,
Hurricane
right?
Katrina happen, and I thought, I can't
Isn't
use this stuff that I've worked, the skills I've gathered to help people understand what's going on the ground, whether it's a shitty stock that's from China that's listed in the U.S., or it's people who can't cross a bridge because they're being shot at because they have too much melanin.
But Mark Cuban,
couldn't do that kind of work.
He used journalists to investigate fake companies and make money off of it.
So Mark hired a guy in Michigan who was a nice guy, did a shitty job of finding shitty companies. There are liars and crooks and thieves in capitalism. And my job as a hedge fund manager at a certain point, after I became an analyst, I was actually a manager of a portfolio that tried to find phony companies. My job was to find those phony companies and let no one know. And wait for everyone, because the best thing that could happen was surprise.
So you
Oh my
load
God,
up-
they just reported a really, really shitty quarter. I thought it's China. It's security, it's surveillance. They seem like nice people. They gave me a great party when I visited. Oh my God, there's no revenues. That's what I wanted as an investor. And so
So did this always nag at you, or did you have an epiphany?
no, Katrina was epiphany, and it was 6 months into my career as an analyst.
so you
but
were
I think it was-
protecting your position in the market, right?
So I think that the answer for the future of journalism is you've got to give a shit.
Yeah.
And you've got to recognize that you're not in it for the money.
So you weren't making money
Well,
off
isn't
this
that the
information.
answer in the past of journalism too?
I think that the questions are raised again because the old model of
Right.
Alan and I go to work for Time Inc. We all go work for Time Inc. We all go work for Newsday. I mean,
Cory, did you make money off of that information?
I made shitloads of money.
Right, so
You
you're
see my
protecting your
shoes?
market position.
Alan Edmonds.
But despite
prefer those
all the
Okay.
noise and all the potential conflicts of interest and all the other bad stuff that's looming out there, is there anyone on this panel that thinks that journalism is worse now than it was 20, 30, 40 years
Okay,
ago?
let's have everyone weigh in on a turn. What do you think, Josh?
Absolutely not. It's never been better.
I agree completely.
You guys are stoned. This,
We're
no,
the only ones not stoned on this panel.
journalism. You may have seen Tom and I in the corner earlier. No, I think that the level of journalism as people consume. I mean, what do people consume?
Well, okay. People,
Okay,
that
let's do
matters.
speed round.
Can I
Okay,
just say-
Tom?
I think that it's so much worse.
Tom.
There's a lot less of it, that's for sure.
less of
there's
it.
more
And we're
of
not
it.
producing more of it, or people who have the experience of it. I mean, I've got 30 years in this industry, 10 years online, 20 off. You know, me and my colleagues, like Dan Farber and so on, not producing any more of those people. I've always asked, what happens to, the new media if the old, who teaches the new media how to walk if the old media dies too soon?
Alan
Well, hopefully
Deutschman.
they
We're going
teach
to have to
before they die.
reinvent the things we know is true. And in the meantime, society is going to suffer because special interest groups are going to take advantage of it. And they already are taking advantage.
Okay, so in one word.
You think it's
Yes.
Worse.
Does
I
nobody
think,
understand?
well, I'm not going to do one
Yes.
word. I think there's still a tremendous amount of great journalism out there, but I think it's having much less of an impact than it used to.
Was that yet? Wait, that's not one word.
No, well,
it
I'm
better
the
or
moderator.
worse?
I can break my own rule.
Is it better or worse? Is it better or
That's
worse?
the road.
It's somewhat worse and it matters less.
Let me change your question.
I think it's
How
so
about this?
much better.
Let me try to change the question. Is the journalism that people consume on average better or worse?
Well, I guess again, I'll go back to my original definition, which is the search for truth, right? Is it easier for somebody now, anywhere in the world, because it's the whole world we're talking about, we're not just talking about San Francisco. Is it easier now or harder now for somebody to find out the truth about anything?
The level of scrutiny on any public figure, on any business,
On anything.
on anything is where at a place
Not
that
that
has
much
never
true.
been.
Look, 10 years ago, we thought there'd be an army of citizen journalists arising and looking at everything.
How often do you look at Wikipedia?
What happened to them?
Wikipedia is a more enduring and important
It's an encyclopedia.
creation of humanity than the pyramids.
It's not true. I mean,
Oh, it absolutely is true. I
like a
mean, if you want to find
pretty
out the
amazing.
truth,
I spent an hour today, as did my whole staff, looking for funny things that the Patriots quarterback said about balls today. And you know what else? The world of journalism, fucking BuzzFeed and everything else, gave me more funny jokes about balls today.
You know what though?
Then I learned about the death of the king of Saudi Arabia.
I'm going to bring up something because you said BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed is the go-to that everyone brings up of why journalism is dead. From my personal experience, at a dinner
I
of
know,
journalists that include Ariana Huffington, the great Michael Wolff, every other BSD in the old media world, we're all at a dinner where Uber detailed a plot to destroy my family, and only one journalist had the balls to write the story, who was Ben Smith from BuzzFeed.
And they're doing some
BuzzFeed
great work.
had
BuzzFeed produces a lot of
24 hours
journalism.
of harassment to kill that story, which old media organizations, a lot of ones I know, would have caved to.
They also do it, but they do,
BuzzFeed does a lot of amazing reporting.
and they
So
do
if
mostly
BuzzFeed
bullshit,
does-
right?
Yeah,
You gotta
but if
admit
the
that, right?
bullshit pays for amazing reporting, we're not okay with that. What were funnies back in the
But
day?
they
What
buy
was
ink by the
classified?
barrel.
They were
right? You
2
don't get
pages.
into an argument with them.
It's the internet. It's infinite pages. If everyone else wants to read another retrospective on the Gilmore Girls so that we know that the most powerful company in Silicon Valley actively wants to destroy journalists' family lives, how is that not a net win?
It's a brilliant story.
I worked at People Magazine for a few years.
You've worked in all kinds of ugly things.
I was the crime reporter, but I think that
And his work at People subsidized my expense account at Fortune and Josh's.
My
right.
point, yeah.
downstairs. Look, I think
It's
were
a
the cat
superb
videos
story,
of the day.
right?
I think the real challenge is going to be when we have a society that consumes media through
Did they try and stop
lowest
you
common
not to write
denominator
it?
lowest common
Let's
denominator
get that up.
links on Facebook, which I'm going to guess everyone in this room gets stuck clicking on something.
I think it's the organization. I mean, we're building, this year we will be profitable on $4 million and for a publication that does
Top line.
investigative business journalism. Like, when has that happened ever in
I
a
gave you
couple
guys- I gave
years
you
on
the-
that much
Exactly.
money?
I gave you
Never.
guys a shout out
couldn't
today
have done that in the past.
on Bloomberg West when I talked about Box's IPO, which is scheduled for tonight. I didn't see the price.
So, Cory, do you still
And so wait,
dabble in investments?
I do not invest. No.
No, not at
What's your shout out? I want to hear your nice
So
shout
the
out.
shout out was they did a great piece saying the reason Box is going public is because the company, there's no good reason for the company to go public.
Yeah, they
but
had
the venture
to.
capitalists got to cash out. And so their last private valuation was $2.4 billion, and their IPO valuation is going to be $1.6 billion.
Yeah.
And so the people who are going to get screwed in that are the employees who built the company for 10 years. Because the last round of venture capitalists will keep their percentage of the company. Let's imagine they bought 5%. They're going to keep that. Or
No, didn't they just
like 10.
pay
But the employees who built the business for 10 years, let's say they had 10%, they're going to get squeezed down to about 6%. And I had a venture capitalist on my show. They say, well, that's not that much because they're going to make so much.
They're pricing it so there's going to be a nice, healthy pop, and that's going to be good for other
You've
enterprise.
seen Box's financials. There is
IT
not going to be a
companies.
healthy pop.
Because
on
the
that
point of this
side.
was to give a shout out to
being
Sarah.
forced to
Was
go
that
public.
okay?
Right.
But there will be.
No, but Sarah's publication was the only story I think I've ever seen, ever, saying, hey, there's a thing caught there. And you don't have to be, you weren't over the top about it. You didn't say this is about greed, but it's about money. And there
Follow
are
the
some
money.
there are some powerful interests, late round venture capitalists, big name venture capitalists,
Yeah.
who want to take their money out, and it's going to screw this happy fantasy that the world has about Silicon Valley, about young people invent a company and they do it in their garage and they get rich
Exactly.
because they're smart.
Why do
and they're
young
nice and
people
they're
want to
white.
run a company? It's really hard. And
That's why only young people do it. The rest of us know better.
But in journalism school, we're telling our undergraduates, we have courses in media entrepreneurship. We're saying this is what you're going to have to do out in the media. You're going to have to be a one-man show like Tom. You're going to have to start something like Sarah. Yeah, and we're telling you
one-man
when they're
shows
18.
don't work. Teams work.
I agree. I think platforms work way more than, I think one of the big things that I've learned from the last 15 years of my career, bouncing between different things and writing books and doing all kinds of things, is I can be the same person, and if I am writing on an individual blog or promoting an individual book, it gets way less attention than literally I was blogging on my personal blog. The next day started Pando. It was me and another kid. We had no traffic, no brand, and the traffic was 10x.
All a kid.
I had to buy him years later. He didn't work for me then.
Crazy kid.
With me. I'm not supposed to say for me. He has a
I
big
think Paul
ego.
should take up drinking again, though. It's much nicer.
I'm not touching that one.
I lectured at your class this last year, and I was really impressed with these people who have a desire to be journalists, and they want to tell truth to the world. They want to find it. They want to go out and beat the bushes and find out what the hell's happening, and come back and tell the rest of the world. And it was, and I got that sense out of these young people that it wasn't about self-aggrandizement. It's not about making money. Those poor.
Yeah, it's about having a
stupid kids.
great fucking story, right?
But having a
Isn't that
story.
fantastic
It's
when
about
you've got a
it's
great
about
fucking
telling an uncomfortable truth. I mean, that's the
Sometimes.
joy. I mean, you're
When
That's
you're
the
doing this
joy.
job well, you're uncomfortable. And it's I've been doing this job for 20 years. I am still uncomfortable before I hit publish on a story.
Yeah.
And it's it's a lot of
Takes
power and
courage.
it's uneasy.
the magazines that you've edited, the books that you've written, they don't tell. We were talking about my friend Walter Isaacson, our friend Walter Isaacson. Your book about Steve Jobs is so revelatory. I read Walter's book, which was great. Everyone read the book.
Well, Walter's book sold about 1,000 times more
Right.
copies.
And
My
your book
came out
was
'cause-
fucking brilliant.
Well, thank you. But I published a book that was a very critical book.
And you said
when,
Steve's-
when
yeah.
people
And it
wanted
was
it. It was hero worshiping, and I would have, I would have retired 15 years ago if I had written a different book.
No, you wouldn't.
But I wouldn't have written that different book. But today, I think all of the incentives for me at publications where everything is being tracked with metrics, where revenue is depending upon that, where the total revenue model for
it always
publications
was
like Recode
tracked
is
with
conferences
metrics.
where you need to have
No, it wasn't.
those people coming.
No, it wasn't. It was not.
You know
It was
what?
not.
It was always
Henry
tracked
Luce
with
did not have metrics for his
Advertising-
story.
And we
advertising
literally-
and circulation of metrics.
We literally hide metrics from all of our staff. We do not allow our staff to see any metrics. We do not run an organization based on metrics.
My show on Bloomberg
Again,
West.
if we go out of business, we go out of business. But like, that's how we're doing it.
My show is the best rated show on Bloomberg Television, and yet online
brag.
we're getting well.
Why did you leave the world?
I said it's the best rated show on Bloomberg Television. I didn't say it's the best rated show on
Why are you back in media, Cory?
Fox.
Why are you back in the media industry? I mean, there's no money in it. I mean,
I'm overpaid. Don't get me wrong.
no,
He's
but
in TV media.
you were
There's
probably
shitloads of
paid
money
better.
I think-
Bloomberg
as a
TV.
hedge fund guy, right?
So
Why are you back?
here's the story. I haven't told this story. So I started I did this hedge fund thing for a while, and I was managing my own account. And I was kind of comfortable. I had a really fun Friday lunch in North Beach with all the boys in North Beach. And we would have this fun Friday afternoon, and I wasn't working hard, and I never had a chance to exhale. And it was glorious. But I had little girls. I have little girls, but they were very little then. And they never really seen my youngest daughter was born sort of my last year. She was 2 or 3 years old. She never really seen me work. What am I going to teach them? What's important in the world to do? What do you want to leave behind? And what do you want to show them like every day? Like, what does work look like? What do you do? And why do you do it? And I was thinking about this stuff, and I got a call from Dan Colarusso, who was the managing editor of Bloomberg News at the time. And he said, hey, I want to have you come out of your retirement or whatever you do on the beach and get your feet out of the fucking sand and come do a tech stock show. And I said, I know that means a lot to you. You're this big TV job and stuff, and you want me to there's no way I'm going to go back to journalism. There's no way I'm going to do TV journalism because I know where that leads. It leads to Extra. It leads to Entertainment Tonight. My cleavage isn't good enough. My stories aren't short enough.
There are physicians for that.
I know. So I saw a doctor.
You got to feed the beast.
So I
every
came up with
day.
this idea. I was like, well, what would I do? What could be, how could you tell stories that would inform people about their world? And how could you do it in this particular context, business and television? And so I thought of something. And in the case of Bloomberg West, it was how is technology changing in a way that is affecting business? It's not about stocks. It's not about trading. It's not about, buy, sell. My competitors have some shows that say, you got to buy this, you got to trade this. Hey, what do you think about Microsoft today? Did you see the press conference? I don't know. Satya Nadella's got a 5 p.m. shadow. Should we sell the stock?
Oh, so it's a tech show, not a business show.
The show's about change and technology.
You guys
and
go
business.
really deep into stuff.
Oh,
really
no,
well
barely.
done.
But the notion is
For TV.
talk about
What's your favorite interview that you did?
very shallow with Sarah Lacy.
Oh, here. So I think we're getting close to the Q&A. So please start thinking of the hard questions that I should have asked if I were a better
You
journalist.
didn't have a chance.
If I had a chance to ask a question.
What do you see amongst your
In the meantime,
students,
what
though?
questions should have we asked each other that we've been holding back? And
Well, so I will say in terms of your job, when I was coming up, I had a lot of disdain for people with journalism degrees. And I always felt like the best journalists I knew didn't have journalism degrees. And people with journalism degrees were mostly working in PR.
What's
But
your degree?
I have to, English literature, totally valuable.
I have chemistry.
But I have found now hiring people, we've found really great talent out of particular journalism schools, like David Holmes, who is hands down one of the best people who has ever come through Pando and is our East Coast
Which
editor
school
now.
did he go
He
to?
he was in Jay Rosen's program
Oh, really?
at NYU, and he is the most complete journalist I have
Jay?
ever known.
Oh,
no,
sorry,
David, our
David, yeah.
guy. He does video. He knows the tech side. He knows enough about the business side, even though he doesn't work on commercial stuff. I'm the only one who kind of goes back and forth between the two sides of the house. But but he can write really well. He can very quickly. He understands how to do social. Like he is
Does he
such
know
a
a bit of
complete,
JavaScript,
small
HTML,
package. I mean, I think he knows
CSS?
some of it. Yeah, I mean, and not.
Okay, so everyone, send your kids to journalism school. Okay.
Certain ones, but it's like, I mean, in terms of what you want to teach your kids, like I would hire 5,000 David Holmes if I could find them. Like he
They're
is
that cheap.
amazing. I would if I could. Well, if you know what, if I could find them, I'd find the money somehow.
Josh, what haven't we asked that we should ask?
I'm still stuck on why you guys think journalism is bad now. I don't get that. I understand that there's a lot more junk. There's a lot more junk food, but there's a lot more everything. And I still think that if you look at the important stuff, the good stuff, the hard to ferret out stuff that comes everywhere from Pando to the New York Times, there's way more of it now. I mean, the thing that sucked about the old days is we were limited. We only had a few sources of information.
Yeah. And you were limited in space.
And we like
You
to
had to
pretend
fight
that
to
they
get a
were really,
page.
really good and trustworthy and important, but they were every bit as corrupt as anything. And nobody was policing them. Does anybody remember how we went to war in Iraq because they had weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah.
The New York Times told us that.
And lots of bad decisions were made because we had few choices. And now, it's raucous, it's crazy. It's like New York City in the 1800s when there were 50 newspapers.
The media is dying. Long live the
Covered
media.
Yiddish theater, and people would fight about it. And that's how media should be. It's dirty and swirling and chaotic. But I think that we have more access to the truth now than we ever did before.
Okay, let's do this quick through the panel, and then we'll go to the audience. Sarah, what haven't we asked that we should ask?
Well, I mean, I don't know about asking, but one thing that I wanted to talk about that I didn't, that I'll say very quickly, I think one of the biggest misconceptions, like if you were to ask my contrarian view on media, is that ultimately the two sides of the house should be separate and someone from ad and business should be in charge. And whoever the editor-in-chief is should never, ever, ever touch the business side. I believe the exact opposite. I believe ultimately, as much as you want to say separate but equal, there's always a single boss. And I am much more comfortable as a journalist working in an organization where a journalist is that ultimate boss. I turn down so much revenue, and there's so many times I put our company at risk for the right reason that someone who had never come from a journalism background never would.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, at Time Inc., Henry Luce is the editor-in-chief to this day.
Right. Well, now our bosses in journalism are Michael Bloomberg, Jeff Bezos, some guy who was Mark Zuckerberg's roommate.
Pierre Midyar.
Pierre. These people weren't journalists. They were incredibly successful, brilliant business people, but they're running the show now.
They're inherently conflict adverse. You cannot be conflict adverse and be the head of a media organization. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think, is it time to turn to the audience? Okay, so
hold on.
Oh, let me let Tom get it.
What we haven't mentioned is native ads and how it's corrupting the media industry. And now everything is considered corrupt anyway. So it's like, that's terrible because we have no trusted sources of information.
I mean, native ads.
Everything, native ads, like New York Times runs a story. It's about Dell, but it's written by Dell's advertising.
But it looks like it's an actual article.
It mimics a story.
Yeah, it's what we used to call advertorial in the print world.
Yeah, but it's labeled. You know it's there. Tom, are you telling me that you're really surprised? You're reading it going, oh my God, I had no idea this was such a good company.
What if Dell gets a real story because it fucking earned it?
Oh, come on.
Is it going to be, say, not paid for by Dell?
It says promoted.
Why is it trying to mimic?
People are sophisticated.
Back in the pre-internet days, I remember at Fortune, all of our research.
That's what advertising.
All of our research showed that our readers had no. Okay.
What then?
Okay, let's turn it to the audience because we can fight it. We'll fight about this afterwards over more beer. Okay, before individual questions, who thinks the media is better now than it was pre-internet? Who thinks it's worse? Who thinks it has less impact? Who thinks it has more impact? Okay, pretty divided. Okay, individual questions. Yes. Yes, we will bring the mic to you.
That's service.
As a former journalism student who didn't go into journalism, but has great respect for the profession, I am curious, Alan, so with the drastic disruption to traditional media, now kind of the whole face of journalism has changed. What are the ambitions of your students when they are majoring in journalism or getting a degree? What is it that they are looking to do?
I think in most journalism schools, there's a split between students who are looking to go to news and ones who are in strategic communications, public relations. There are 4 to 5 times more jobs in the public relations, strategic communications side than there is in
As we all know
what
from
used
our
to be
inboxes.
called news.
No one trusts
But on both sides, it's such a different world. I mean, when we came up, if you could report and write, or if you could be on TV, or you generally were good at one thing, or if you could take, do photography. Our students now, they have to learn everything. They have to learn audio, video, interactive, editing. In a world where wherever they go, they're going to have to be using all forms of media. When I was at Fortune, I asked once, could I take my own photographs? And they said, that's never been done in the history of the magazine. Writers write and photographers are good at taking photos. And I found that was wrong. There was one guy who did both. His name was Walker Evans.
And now Franken on SNL, he had his own.
Most of the students still go into the public relations side, but all of them kind of have to study everything and be able to do everything. And it's a lot more challenging than when we
fabulous
started.
because I love learning all that stuff.
Yeah.
But most journalists, they can't type very well, and they certainly can't spell, and they refuse to learn anything else, but they can tell great stories.
Next question. Yes.
So we talked a little bit about native advertising, but there's also this parallel trend of branded, journalism. And I'm using
such
quotation
thing.
marks. And a lot of times it's more feature stories than news stories. And we've been really focused mostly on business stories and news stories. Urban Sitter today launched a parenting magazine, for example. But even Dell has Tech Page One, which has mostly feature stories about technology, very few of which are actually about Dell. And that's true, actually, of their native advertising, too. So would love a quick read from the panel as to whether you think, is journalism the act of investigating, reporting, fact-checking, and writing a good story, period? Or does it matter, where that story runs? Is a well-fact-checked, well-written story lose credibility if it happens to be
Yes,
on
it does.
Tech Page One
It's
versus
better if it
something
runs in an independent third-party format. If it's published by the company it publishes, it can be the best story in the world, but it's still going to lose in the perception of the reader. And I think we're going to end up reinventing a third-party independent media industry, the one that we're losing now. Unfortunately, we have to destroy it in order to reinvent it, because companies can't be media companies. They can try. There's some stuff they can do, but it's really hard to do this.
I think it's a
Get up
major-
every morning and do it again. And
I
again
think there's a
and
major
again.
reader
They
trust
can't
issue,
do
but I
it.
think there's a lot of areas of media and I don't know if you would call it journalism, but media certainly, where there's always been conflicts. Like fashion magazines, you have, people who are, or let's say beauty magazines, they're using every single product, they're being sent products, there's always been a blended advertorial thing. So like, do I get worried by an e-commerce company that starts doing content that's around beauty or fashion? Like, no, because I think that's always been a blended thing. But I think when you're talking about people's money, I think when you're talking about politics, I think when you're talking about things that really impact the world, then, like I said earlier, all we have is reader trust. And ultimately, all of our views on where something's appropriate to run doesn't matter at all. It matters because of reader trust. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of journalists who need outlets, and they may go work at an outlet like that, and they may do amazing work. But
Do you
I
accept
do think it's
native ads,
tainted.
by the way, Sarah Pando?
No, we don't accept anything written by a company.
I think what you're talking about is a little bit more insidious than native ads. Native ads, the way I think of native ads, it says promoted. It says to the reader, buyer beware.
Smaller and
That's
smaller.
a really important thing. The reader always has to know, in my opinion, who's bringing me this. And if it says promoted, then they can
And what is it
understand.
trying to look
But
like the
when
real
it's something
thing?
like Red Bull magazine, right? What is that? And Red Bull magazine saluting the extreme sport lifestyle, and Formula One racing and all that. It starts to get really confusing. And I'm not really sure, like, is Red Bull a soft drink company or is it a
It's a
publishing
media company.
Is it a media
Yeah.
company?
I met an executive from Red Bull. He came to see me speak in Amsterdam last year. And I was really pleased and thanked him. And he said, the secret of Red Bull is the bull never speaks. The athletes speak for Red Bull.
I thought it was extreme doses of caffeine, but I guess.
I thought it was taurine.
Next question, way in the
I have a
back.
question. So who do you guys think has the best investigative journalism today? What outlet?
Well, Pando's doing
I
pretty
think
well.
we do, but I'm pretty biased. We don't have as much as I'd like.
But it
but I
takes
think
a
what we
long
have is
time to
amazing.
do a story, 5
Yeah.
months.
We don't, yeah, we're lucky to do 15 stories a day, which is nothing compared to most blogs. But
It will be more objective, not just yourselves.
So
but
outside of
really,
Bloomberg
like,
News, I got to say ProPublica's killing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
front line.
I mean,
yeah.
Jesse Eisinger won my buddy Jesse Eisinger, but he won the Pulitzer Prize year before last, and
I think
they're doing really great stuff that's both.
And
I think-
Politico, too.
I think the challenge in investigative journalism actually is that the investigative journalism community, which unfortunately exists. Every journalist should be an investigative journalist, right? That's what a journalism is. The challenge is doing daily investigative journalism is finding shit no one else wants to be found every day, not disappearing for 3 months or 5 months. I mean, that stuff's really hard, and it's hard for
Sometimes it can be in
organizations
plain
to
view, though,
make
too.
a decision to dedicate the resources to let someone disappear.
I think The Guardian has done really amazing
The
stuff.
Guardian's doing
I
great
think-
stuff, but
I think that
every
what's
day
really
is hard.
sad for me, having been at TechCrunch, where TechCrunch used to TechCrunch uncovered a lot of huge scandals at a time no one was writing about the tech world in Silicon Valley, and I was a really proud part of that. And it kind of makes me, and a lot of the early generation blogs were.
Yeah, I wish
and
they
it makes
did
me
more of
sad
that,
that
yeah.
a lot of those early generation blogs really only rewrite press releases now, and the people who are, by and large, uncovering what's really going on in the tech industry is back to old media. Really, it's back to the New York Times. It's back to the Guardian.
Word on the street.
Because they have the traditions, they have the
and it's-
culture.
Used to
of it.
be.
You're right, and
Used
if
to
they
be.
can do it, there's really no reason that people who are closer to the story in Silicon Valley can't, and they can, because we saw it in the early wave of blogging. So it's like the ones I really respect tend to be more old media, sadly enough, than other small companies like us.
In business press, it used to be the Herd on the Street and Barron's every Saturday were must-reads because there was some investigative, in a way, they wouldn't, Alan Abelson, I don't think would ever call himself an investigative journalist.
Mondays were
But
always
he
when
would,
the
but every
mergers were
Saturday on
announced,
Barron's,
yeah.
there'd be a story about some company that wasn't what it was cracked up to be. There'd be something that was unveiled. And Herd on the Street would do it every day in the Wall Street Journal when Norm Perlstein was the editor, and they don't.
But
they don't
you can
it
do
anymore.
that today. I can look into Google's numbers and come up with a fantastic story that nobody's covering yet. 1,000 journalists looked at the same numbers. Journalists don't know how to cover business anymore. Instead of following the money, they follow a self-driving car.
Next question in the back.
I love that. Wait, I love that. I want to think about that for a minute. I
I'm
love
a
that.
retired editor here, and I have a question for you beyond the top line old media, Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, you name it. What do you suggest for good regional papers to do in terms of their business sections? And I think it's a big deal because a lot of companies would prefer probably just to do away with them. Some of them are still running stock tables.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious from you folks.
It's ridiculous. The Chronicle
Let me finish.
doesn't cover the Silicon Valley. San Jose Mercury doesn't.
Okay, let me finish here. It doesn't have to be the Chronicle or San Jose Mercury News, but I'm just kind of curious of what's your recommendation for should regional or local papers cover business news, and particularly the Valley, or should they just move on? And a little bit of, to take a little bit farther, business coverage over the years, with the exceptions of the top lines, have been terrible. I mean, they've been really weak. They have been sometimes peopled by reporters who couldn't do other things. And so I do think we're at a great point in terms of business coverage overall.
So I think I'll go super quick. Like, I think it is a legit problem if you're in a big market like San Francisco or Silicon Valley, because the companies here are an international story. They're not a local regional story. And I think there's a very real talent and mandate problem. I think, I started my career in Memphis, Tennessee, working for the Memphis Business Journal. And that's an amazing market to cover business because you have massive private money in, cotton. You have big public companies like FedEx who don't get covered with a level of local scrutiny because no one's going to put a local beat reporter in Memphis just to cover FedEx day in and day out. I had a huge cover and one of the first threatened lawsuits was over something with Elvis Presley Enterprises. Being in that market taught me how to be. Before that.
He was the
before
CEO
him.
of that, so we had him on our show last week.
No, Jack Soden, in the back Jack Soden days. But like that market taught me how to be a good business journalist because there were private companies who didn't have a lot of scrutiny and didn't want things to be uncovered. I think if you're trying to cover Silicon Valley,
why wouldn't you want to cover your local
it's
companies?
Really, really hard. And I think you have a very real hard problem of, do you cover business that's not Google and Apple and say, we're going to own everything else and educate people on like the local restaurant scene or small business entrepreneurs? I think it's a really real problem. I don't know the answer, but I think trying to compete with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Guardian and us on tech,
you should try and own those stories. As a local paper, this is in my neighborhood, and I'm not getting those stories, I'd fire every one of them. The thing with local journalism was that they didn't go out in their communities. I remember reading about the St. Louis Dispatch. They had come up with this idea a few years ago. They're going to send out the journalists with mobile modems and a laptop, and they were going to call them mojos for mobile journalists. I was like, oh my God, we used to do that all the time. Go out in the community and find
But that's
stories.
not the issue, Tom. If you're an up-and-coming reporter who is the best beat reporter on Apple, you won't stay at the Chronicle. You won't stay at the Chronicle.
That's a great way to go up there.
I would love to see the other metro papers covering things that aren't the stock market. Apple, Google. I'd love to see the labor movement. I mean, I'm teaching Introduction to Reporting and Writing. The story I gave my students this week was Jody Cantor's piece in the New York Times on the Starbucks barista with a 4-year-old son who couldn't get childcare or even get relatives or friends to watch her son because Starbucks has this, and every restaurant and big box retailer now has scheduling software that says, you're going to work tonight until 11 p.m. and then you're going to work tomorrow at 5 p.m. and you have no notice. Those sort of human stories, things like labor stories. I tell my students, they should. Of course, Jody is an amazing reporter, and it takes a lot of experience to be able to do that. But my students work at Starbucks. They've lived this. This is things that are affecting workers around the world. I think we get so fixated on Apple, and Google, and Amazon.
I think it's a small idea, but it's the big idea of Bloomberg West is that we don't talk about stock charts. We don't talk about investors. When someone mentions investors, what investors want from eBay, and I did this today on my show, is like, I don't care about investors.
Why not?
I don't care about people. I want to know how this business is changing. But I think more specifically to answer your question, I think there's a great model. And we talked about this a little bit when I was up in Reno. There's a great model for local business coverage that's financially sustainable. And a trick to it is mentioning every promotion. The business papers do this really great. The Memphis Business Journal, which I've actually read a lot because I had some investments there back.
I think as a journalist, you always want to be working on the biggest story you can find.
San Francisco Business Times does a great job.
Stories.
San Francisco Business Times does a great job. And the people who subscribe to that publication read it so they can find out which regional vice president of sales became the vice president of sales. And their names are in that thing a lot. But the result is the reporters are getting close to those people who are making changes in those regional businesses. Yeah. And so suddenly they start to report about the shit that's actually going on the ground. Who's selling more of something? What business is growing? Who's taking that? Hey, what's that building being built for the center of town? Yeah. And you end up having a like real on-the-ground reporting and a high level of interest because the people who are in business care about that business. And I think
that's how journalism is done, by getting into the community. Absolutely.
Let's go to the next question right over here. Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dirk Lüthen. I co-founded one of the last real papers, Financial Times in Germany, in the late 90s. And now I moved to the Valley to become a tech entrepreneur. But I would be interested, because do you think that, because what you're leaving out of the equation is actually the readers, right? Are you all producing quality content? And I don't hear at all, that you say, if you produce so good quality content, why can you not charge? Or will that be the future, that you can charge readers again?
I don't believe in charging readers. We have a membership where if someone really believes in our journalism and wants to financially support us, they'll get certain things like videos from our events, or we do a quarterly print magazine. There are certain additional things that they can get as part of that, which is great. But we will never have a firewall. We will never have a paywall. I think that when I was coming up with the media, the way I understood it, and I don't know if this is true for all magazines, but the ones I worked at, the reason there was a subscription price is it barely paid for getting the thing to you. It was not a profit center at publications. And I don't believe it should be a profit center now, because we have disintermediated the way of getting that to you. So people always want to say, well, people paid for it before. And it's like, people paid for it because something was getting mailed to you. They were paying essentially the postage.
They cut down trees and...
Right. Yeah. But I believe.
But now that's the New York Times business model now, and it seems to be
I think
working.
the biggest problem is a talent issue. Really great writers want to be widely read, and when you're talking about speaking truth to power, if you're behind a paywall, they can ignore what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
writers hate paywalls.
You cannot do investigative reporting behind a paywall. You can't do it
I
and be effective.
I think there's always going to be room for some small slice of media to be paid. I think that people will pay for what they consider to be essential. And essential is that top 1%. I pay for the New York Times. I want a daily baseline of truth, and they're really good at that, and it's a very expensive proposition, so I will give them $15 a month so that I have that. But I'm not paying for anything else. I don't need many sources of that. That's my baseline. Similarly, people will pay for the Wall Street Journal to get that baseline of.
I don't think there's a future for
These are
unpaid
100-year
media.
franchises, 100-plus-year franchises. I mean, they had more than 100 years of building that trust
Absolutely.
so that
But
you
the
pay
point
that.
is, you're saying, will people pay? And I'm saying they'll pay for what's what they consider to be essential. I pay for HBO, I pay for fast cable, which is media. Those are the things I consider to be essential. The rest of the battle in media is for relevance.
And what
We'll look at what's relevant, and if I look at it, there's a way to
Josh,
make a living.
mobile, and Sarah, maybe you know your own numbers. Mobile seems to be killing media because it's like the second apocalypse. Dollars became dimes in terms of paper to online, and now to mobile, they're becoming pennies. And I'm seeing reports of like 1/10 the revenue.
Right.
And you can't show 10 times as many ads on a mobile screen.
There's been a huge shakeout.
I think that-
How's that gonna? No,
Every
but
time
this is the second
in
apocalypse.
the last 20 years of technology where advertising can suddenly be measured, with every measurement, the value of advertising goes down. So, when I worked at People, it was a great publisher, Ann Moore, and she would say, advertising is an article of faith. You have to just believe that it works. And so write me a check.
And they wrote very
Those were
big
the
checks.
days.
And billboards are the same way, right? Like on some level, if you put
But like
a fucking
billboards
lizard on a
and
billboard,
TV, like these
they
things
can't be
still
measured,
sell.
and they still sell. But the CPMS in those are at such a higher level, and I think I have no idea what the answer is. But I think that you've hit the exact problem, because we all start in the media world where the money was rushing in, and the results of the ads were not measured. None of us, for all the places that we worked, and all of them had subscriptions,
They had a rough idea.
but the revenue is principally from advertising. The advertising wasn't measured. And now we live in a world where the advertising is measured and the distribution costs are lower, and we have not figured out how to pay for the journalism that I think that we think as a society we need to have.
Yeah. All those computer experts, they haven't figured it out, like Google and so on. It's the most serious problem on the internet.
Well, I don't think it's an algorithm. I mean, I think that's part of the
It's not an
problem. Like, we don't
algorithm.
sell based on banner ads and placement and CPMs and algorithm. In fact, we have a very small part of our business that's banners, and it's usually just stitching together larger custom programs. And we have jaw-droppingly high CPMs because we're just sorry, we have a better audience. I think if you participate in that downward spiral, you get the downward spiral, but I don't think you have to participate.
You have to run to
we had
keep still.
We had an experiment that.
Oh, wait,
played
what
out
kind
in
of,
real time.
what kind of CPMs?
Let's
Give me a number.
For us,
What kind of CPMs?
like $16 to high $20.
Wow. Compare that to a Yahoo
$1.
News page, which would be about a 20 cents.
Yeah, or other tech blogs where it's like $1.
This cost per 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we, okay, I think before we go on an endless discussion here, even though it's fascinating, we have another question in the middle there.
So it actually pulls off of what you've been saying. I mean, the public is pretty used to getting their information basically for free. I mean, they never really funded it, right? And now there's more information and access than there ever has before. So what is the public's role and responsibility in great journalism?
Well, I've always said that the public won't pay for the media they should read, but special interest groups will gladly pay for the media they want them to read. And, you know, when the internet started, they said advertising on the internet, I don't know if you guys remember, oh, that won't never fly, right? That was the general perception of advertising. We're not going to have it on the internet. Well, they got used to it, right? And we'll get used to paying for it one way or another.
I think readers should vote with their feet. And I think I hear so many people bitch about publications in the Valley, and they still send them their press releases. They still speak at their conferences. They still support them. I think people should vote with their feet.
Yeah, I think the big problem for readers is now that readers have such tremendous choice to select where they want to get their news and information.
But it all looks the same.
Well, no. Well, I mean, Pew did a fascinating study a couple of months ago about which media sources do Americans recognize and trust. And people segregate based on politics, liberal and conservative. There's hardly any overlap between the news sources that political liberals say that they read and trust and that political conservatives do. I think the only two publications that have a strong appeal across the political spectrum of any publications are the Wall Street Journal and The Economist. So, I mean, if you actually want to have an impact, beyond, the polarized in America today, actually those are kind of your only hopes, which is kind of sad.
No, I'm not going to say it out loud. I was just thinking dark thoughts. One of those titles.
I feel like, there's often a conversation on Bloomberg News about, what does our viewer want? What is our viewer? And I'm like, our viewers aren't fucking watching us. Like the world, there are so many people who want the information that we can gather. And if we try to respond to the small audience that we have, as big as our audience is getting bigger and bigger, but, I've never felt like to your point, like I love that you're not showing your people what their numbers are. I mean, I think that's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
You have to do the work because you can't respond to the tiny PandoDaily audience, the tiny Bloomberg television audience, the tiny CNN audience. I mean, we keep hearing stories about how people trust the media less, how they aren't spending as much money on media, and then we're like, well, we got to focus on the little audience we have. We have a world of people who need the information that we can gather as journalists to help inform them to understand the really confusing world.
I mean, you can't.
We have this a time of enormous change.
Yeah.
So I can't listen to my audience. I have to tell them what I think they should do, and I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, if you're selling a consumer package good, you want to bring in focus groups and ask them, like, did you like the black man on the cover? Or do you like the little child? Or did you like this color? You can't do journalism that way. You have to solely chase truth. And if people like it and read it, they like it and read it.
But Clorox doesn't bring in the bleach buyers and say, what kind of bleach do you want? They bring in the world and say, what do you want as a product? That's a smart way to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't agree with any of that. I mean, look at Huffington Post and look at BuzzFeed, BuzzFeed in particular. Right? BuzzFeed is a killer because it's so good at not focus group testing, but just throwing everything out there and they're saying, does this headline work? No, does this headline work better than that one? Let's use this one. Let's change those words. Let's move this image from here to here. All this in real time.
But it's the same thing. They're leading with their chins. They're to quote the Sinatra tune, right? They're out there saying, like, we're going to try to. They've got an algorithm, but we think this is going to work better than that thing. Let's see if it works. Hey, it's working. Let's do more of that.
But
Hey, I've got an algorithm.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's basically there's room for all of it.
I think
mean,
I agree with you. I think there's room for all of it. I think
Exactly.
a lot of those
It's an
are good
and world.
publications. That's not the way we're building, but like
right.
I don't think there's a
You're
value
doing a
judgment
bespoke,
on it.
hand-curated,
Right.
pay attention, do quality, small group kind of class, not mass.
Right.
And they're doing mass, and they're really
If
good
you're
at
doing
it.
mass, you're right. That is the stakes of it.
Next question in the back, please, and then here in the aisle after.
This is for Sarah mainly. I'm curious about your what is your business model? How are you generating revenues?
Money.
And I think you said this is the first year that you were profitable.
We are going to be profitable this year. We've had
Why this
profitable
year
months.
and what's
Yeah.
different?
So it's a couple of different things. We have a very, 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 very small amount of our revenue that's memberships and subscriptions that we've kind of always marketed and sold wrong, and we're going to take yet another swing at it. But we would love at some point for like our power readers who really love us and want to have more of a special experience to be able to contribute more, because increasingly we're more aligned with our readers than anyone else. We've pissed off the bulk of Silicon Valley. But the bulk of our revenue are a dozen or so very big six-figure advertisers for us that we largely do custom campaigns for, that where we have total editorial control. We don't accept anything else anyone has written. We don't accept any sort of guidelines about content at all. But we will produce really amazing editorial that's aligned to a topic they want to be aligned with. And so, for instance, this weekend we're doing a 24-hour event that Braintree is sponsored that was at a very, very high price tag called Don't Be Awful. That's basically about, loosely interpreted, how the tech world can be less horrible, which is something Braintree wanted their brand aligned with. Now, there's not Braintree people on there. We've done all the editorial. In fact, we may say, and probably will because it's us, say many things that deeply offend and upset them. But, part of their brand proposition that they've been doing with their big macro spend in the market for 6 months has been this easy ability to suddenly start taking payments. The question we're asking is, just because you can build something that easily takes payments, is that actually good for the world, and how can we kind of do better? So we're almost challenging them on their own marketing message, and it's something that they want to be part of that they think is a cool event, so they're spending a shitload of money for us to go in and do it for them, and it's great for us because we spent the last year calling out a lot of bad behavior, and we ended up the year kind of bummed, and it's actually refreshing to sort of have more proactive conversations. So we do very big custom campaigns in a way sort of similar to how Vice does, because we reach an audience in an authentic way very deeply that we think other publications can't.
Do you disclose that Braintree is the sponsor?
Yeah, everywhere. We, if anything, over-disclose. But it was our idea. We went to them with the idea. They basically write a check, and then they have no further input. And look, we have had many campaigns blow up. We have, at times lost customers. For instance, we've had certain content series or things that people wanted to do, and then maybe, this is totally hypothetical. This is not the real case because, it would not be cool of me to expose certain things. But, say you are an accountant and you are representing Facebook, and Facebook suddenly goes through huge scandals, and it was going to be about social media. Well, we're obviously going to be covering that in this, and they would, they could pull the money and then say, we can't be part of this unless you can promise our client is going to be protected. We obviously won't do that as a news organization. So, we lose a lot of revenue because we do have total editorial control. When we do webinars, we won't put you on there because you paid for it. So there's a lot of revenue we lose because of that approach. But we also have several big six-figure customers. They're going to grow by 50% this year. And they think that we do a kind of journalism no one else does that's important to the ecosystem.
Do we have one more question from the audience? Yes, can we get you a mic? Do you have a microphone?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Hi. So I think this conversation is really interesting. Tom, you're saying that the ad revenue is declining, and Sarah, you're saying that people shouldn't have to pay. I guess my question is one of you wrong, or is it just going to keep spiraling down?
Who said somebody's not getting paid? Shouldn't be paid.
I said
Sarah
readers
said that
would
the
pay.
readers shouldn't have to pay, and you said that the ad revenue is spiraling downward.
I think you're
I don't
wrong.
think Sarah's going to have a choice in the future. I think to never say never is trying to predict that the economic downward spiral is going to stop, and we don't see that stopping. It's not stopping. And so what it will pay for it, and the shift to mobile is accelerating that trend. So yes, of course, nobody wants to charge a paywall, but what choice
I
is
think
there
if you're
going to
selling
be?
only banner CPM advertising, you're screwed.
I think
But
publications
there's a lot of
like Sarah's
sponsorship and
can
ads that aren't
find
that.
models that will work for Sarah's publication, but it's not something that necessarily would work for other media publications.
There's two.
We need something that works for everyone.
I'll tell you what the scary thing is the bulk of what people are doing is events. I don't know what is up with my ear. This thing has not stayed on for more than 30 seconds. Is all doing events.
lot of
No,
earring,
it's not my
must
earring
be.
because I tried taking off the
The
earring.
media's a loss leader.
So the problem is even Fortune is essentially an events business now. And the problem with events is, first of all, that is the single biggest conflict where someone can hurt you because if people will not appear on stage, you don't have an event. That is the single biggest way someone can bully you on a story. They can't on investor because they've already invested. What are they going to do? I mean, like other things are not, but that is a direct bullying.
They love
that I think
stages.
actually is the scariest conflict. That said, you know, the other problem is events don't scale. You know, you can flood, like, look at what Recode is doing. They have the most marquee business event and have for 10 years. And, you know, it's one of only 2 conferences that I go to every year. And yet now, in order to grow the business, they have to have 15 other mini codes throughout the year. I don't know anyone who goes to those. And I think they're eroding the brand and the process.
Same with Gigaom.
Events are a great way to basically make sure as a media business you don't need more venture capital because you can bootstrap yourself to becoming a big enough brand that you're not only events, but if your end game is events, and if you have a brand like Fortune and you're an events business, that's a brutal way to make a living. Like that's worse than a services business. Like events is the bad crack of media.
But media has to be a Heinz media business model where you got 57 varieties of revenues.
Yeah.
I think what's emerging online is that there are 2 kinds of advertising revenues. And there's the measured cost per click, how many people are on it, are they anywhere near our demographic, and then there's like, I've got to be on PandoDaily. I am only going to sell this ridiculously expensive watch by being on this, you know, on the GQ website, and it's not about the number of clicks, it's about associating with that brand, and I'm going to be there. And those are increasingly differentiating, right? The value of that particular demographic and associating with the brand of that media thing is on a high level, and the value of banner ads, of click ads, of the little box that pops up where there's kind of amazing technology. There's a real-time auction. As you click on a web page and the web page comes down, in the microseconds before the page shows up, there's an auction over you. Yeah. And if you were shopping for a watch or for a pair of shoes or for kids' clothing, they know that the marketers writ large know enough about your cookies to bid on that. That's a shitty business for a media company. Because while the ads are there to be gobbled up, they're not high value. They don't care who you are as a company presenting information, writing great stories, hiring journalists in this for 5 months. It's an eyeball.
Yeah.
And so we're increasingly seeing a separation there. And the trick for media companies is going to be to get the big money. And
we are going. I think our time is up, unfortunately. But the panel is going to go home and try to figure out the rest of the media equation, and then present it at our next event for the Churchill Club. So thank you all so much for coming, and bring it back to Karen.
I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing their thoughts, both dark and light, so passionately. Thank you so much. As a small token of our appreciation, we have for you the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Please wear that in good health. Video recording should be available hopefully by tomorrow on the Churchill Club YouTube channel.
Or on my site.
Or on Tom's site.
Silicon Valley Watcher.
And you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you soon. Good night.
Thank you.